This podcast is brought to you by Whisper, the digital communication platform that's changing the game for local governments. Whisper makes it easy to boost community engagement and keep citizens informed through SMS, email, social media, voice messaging, and more, all from the one platform. Better yet, it's easy to use and requires no technical skills. To find out more, head to whisper.com. That's WHISPIR.com.
Coming to you from Chicago, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. We engage the brightest minds in local government. I'm Dan Bolin, a local government attorney and partner at the Ansel Glink Law Firm in Chicago. Today, I'm joined by Victoria Barrett, a transportation planner with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, known better to its friends as CMAP. Vicki, welcome to GovLove.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you. And today we're talking about the current state of traffic safety in northeastern Illinois. We'll talk about what local governments can do to improve the safety of pedestrians and flatten the trend in pedestrian-related casualties. Victoria will talk about the ongoing project undertaken by CMAP designed to aid the Chicagoland area in meeting its traffic safety goals and turn the tide towards a more navigable region for pedestrians. But first, let's get started with our signature lightning round. Pedestrian safety is top of mind, of course, because at the time of this recording, it's back to school time. Vicki, that means we have to ask you the questions I've been seeing on the signs that the kids are holding up on their back to school photos on Facebook. Question one, what grade are you in?
Let's see. I think at this point, I'd have to say I'm in some kind of advanced studies program, maybe for people who are becoming PhDs in balancing child raising careers and improving the quality of life for everybody.
Like School of Hard Knocks type, like really advanced degree. I appreciate that. So, and along those lines, who would you say is your teacher?
That's a good question. I've had lots of professional teachers that I would want to reference here, but I'd say that at the moment I am actually learning the most from the people on the ground here in the Chicago region. And I'm actually learning a lot from children right now. I think coming out of these last couple of years and the challenges that particularly have been at play for our young people has really taught me to focus on quality of life and social and emotional health and you know, healthy bodies and really taking care of people ahead of maybe other priorities.
Oh, that's a very sweet sentiment. And so we'll pivot to an even more serious question. What is your favorite color?
My favorite color is orange, and not necessarily like day glow traffic safety orange, just orange.
Oh, I also like orange. Proud graduate and Fighting Illini football season ticket holder I am. So there's a lot of orange going on in my life. And what a nice related color to your work in transportation. That's also a nice sense. So what shade are you talking about when you say not like construction orange? Like we're talking like there's a range of shades of orange. It's kind of a funny color that way.
Yeah, I'm going to go with like, you know, the Crayola crayon orange, real medium orange. Yeah.
Yeah, right down the middle.
Right.
Not reflective necessarily. Just a nice crayon orange. I like
exactly.
it. What is your favorite food?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. I love food in general. That's like one of my hobbies, but I'd have to say right now I'm pretty focused on tomatoes. It's the end of the summer, and I'm enjoying the bounty of the summer harvest of tomatoes at the moment.
Yeah, I get these tomatoes from friends. Like, what do we do with all these tomatoes at the end of the summer? What, you got any tips and any advice?
Well, my favorite way to eat tomatoes is to slice them and put salt and pepper on them and eat them.
Yes, that's a fine way to enjoy a high quality tomato. And I guess the last question here for a lightning round is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
That's another good question. And I am a believer in, never believing that I'm fully grown up. So I guess I'd have to say a traffic safety superhero, right? I would like to help.
Yeah.
I would like to help people feel safer and be safer on our roadways.
Oh, so like your superhero outfit, what are we talking, like a cape? What's kind of your business attire in this line of work?
Something very, comfortable that I can walk around a lot, probably orange, also good for cycling, all of that.
Oh, I like that very much. For the listener, Vicky did have all of these responses written out verbatim on one of those signs that children hold up for their Facebook photos. It's a really big sign, and she did a great job reading to it. It's the end of our lightning round. You have a perfect score, which means we can move on with our interview. So let's get right to it. Vicky, please tell me about your career path, starting with the day you were born.
Way back in the 70s. No, I'll jump into it as a little bit about my childhood growing up. I grew up in the Chicago region in a suburb and in a community that was highly walkable. And as a Gen Xer, I would say that, walking to and from places was the status quo when I was growing up. That was how kids got around. It gave us a certain amount of independence, and walking to school or even taking public transit to school, which is how I got to high school, was the de facto way of traveling. So that definitely informed what happened to me when I started to study. And I started in my studies in architecture and quickly realized that I was much more interested in what was happening outside of the buildings, and how the buildings were interacting with public space and creating a kind of outdoor room of our cities. So urban design and urban planning were kind of a very logical path forward for me. And I also I am a traveler. I am a traveler in every sense of the word. I like to walk. I like to bicycle. I like to, travel to different countries and see things and cultures. So walking through cities has always informed my experience and interacting with the people in the spaces that way. So when I found out that you could actually study transportation planning, I was like, that is for me. So how people move through cities, move across spaces, the kinds of experiences they have while they do that was an early passion of mine, and something I quickly and completely dedicated my career towards. I moved into the private sector for most of my career doing consulting. I happened to work for an amazing boss who owned a firm called Charlier Associates in Boulder, Colorado. Jim Charlier is one of the teachers that I would say is informed my career very, very much. And he did a lot of work that really had the goal of promoting healthy, sustainable, climate-friendly mobility habits in our communities. So I got a chance to work on a lot of cool projects through that experience. And eventually it brought me here to Chicago, back to Chicago. And here I am today.
Oh, we're glad you are here today. What are some of the cool projects you worked on in Colorado you mentioned?
Well, a lot of cool things. We did some of the early congestion mitigation and air quality projects that were focused in the city of Denver, that have now informed a lot of infill development in the lower downtown area of Denver. We worked on some policy projects with an organization called Transportation for America, trying to inform the federal transportation platform that guides a lot of the spending that we do in our transportation planning. And also got to work on some projects that were really meant to increase our ability to measure active transportation, which refers to walking and bicycling and transit use. It's a form of mobility that doesn't get measured very accurately, but it's important to measure it to know that what we're doing is making the impacts that we want. So cool planning projects, bicycle and pedestrian plans for communities, and helping people, understand the opportunities for improving that kind of mobility.
Very cool. And what brought you back to Chicago then?
Well, my family brought me back to Chicago, and I was happy to return. I lived in a couple other places in between that also really informed my career path. I spent some years living in Germany, so I got a chance to see a little bit about transportation priorities in a European country, and that factors a lot into some of the educational passions that I have about teaching our young people about traffic safety. I've also lived in Washington, D.C., which is a fantastic place to walk and travel and use transit, and got a chance to play around there for a while too.
Oh, that's super fun. Well, when did you decide to join CMAP? How'd you first get involved?
I actually joined CMAP about 2 years ago. And it was after a varied path. I'd been in the private sector for a while and done some living in other places, as I mentioned. I returned back from a stay in Germany and decided to turn my attention to a very local passion, and that was working in the city of Evanston as an advocate for helping the city move forward on some of its plans to improve bicycle and pedestrian mobility and safety. So I did a couple things. I started an advocacy group called Go Evanston with the mission to expand, healthy, active, climate-friendly modes of travel, with education and engagement as its missions, and encouraging people to use those modes. I also had a chance to work on the city's climate action and resilience plan, which, transportation sector accounts for about 1/3 of all greenhouse gases, and that's surface transportation alone, so on our roads and highways. About 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it is a major player in the climate game, and the way we move around is having an impact on our climate. And so there are many ways in which we can help mitigate that. And I was allowed to kind of dig into that topic as part of the city's climate plan.
Oh, very cool. How does your environmental work at the city tie into your current work at CMAP?
Well, it's, there are these missions all overlap in active transportation. Sustainability, sustainable modes of transportation that reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and reduce greenhouse gas emissions are the same modes that promote healthy behavior. So, getting a walk into your daily routine every day is something that can have a pretty profound impact on your health, the health of children. All of that with kind of just the general happiness I find in using those modes and being outside is something, and the spaces that we create to account for those modes is something I've long been passionate with. So they also are very affordable modes of transportation. So there's a big equity piece in making walking, bicycling, transit use more accessible, safer, more enjoyable, more civilized. Those are all overlapping ideas that really at the center of them is about expanding mobility for pedestrians, bicyclists, and creating a very holistic system for those modes in our current transportation network.
And maybe I got ahead of myself a bit, but what is your role at CMAP, and what do you do every day there?
Yeah, so I am a transportation planner in the agency's policy division. It's called Regional Policy and Implementation. And we are working, CMAP has long been involved in advancing traffic safety, but has put, as we saw, numbers increase nationally and regionally, has put more power into that effort at the agency level to coordinate more closely across divisions and also develop some policy to take further action in the traffic safety space on a policy level, on providing technical assistance to our local partners, developing data resources, which is kind of step number one for local partners to kind of understand what their traffic safety issues are. So it's been kind of coalescing all the safety work that's been done and using it to better inform our decision-making as a region.
Oh, very cool. Important work. And an important part of that work, I understand you recently starred in a video from CMAP and the Roadway Safety Foundation, using road design and technology to support pedestrian safety. How did you audition to be cast in this role?
I was going to say, you can look up my IMDb now as the star of that video. We have a lot of partners on this work. The safety space is a large community. A lot of that work gets done at the national level in Washington, D.C. It's where, a lot of our transportation dollars related to safety originates in the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. So the partners that are in DC are really important because they're some of the people that analyze the data and help develop products, educational resources, guidance for people to do better and to improve traffic safety. So I know Bruce connected through other people in the transportation planning and safety space, and they reached out and wanted somebody on the ground who's kind of doing the work in a city in the United States to contribute. So that's how I got involved in this project.
Bruce from the Roadway Safety Foundation.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
what is that foundation? Do you tell me a little bit about it?
The Roadway Safety Foundation is a Washington, D.C. based organization that has a number of programs devoted to improving safety, both from the users, the actual travelers on the network, but also educating and traffic safety professionals and awarding, work well done in the traffic safety field. So they're important players at the federal level on this topic.
Well, they're important players on this topic and in this video. Dear listener, we're going to include a link in the show notes, but why don't we take a look at a few clips and have you tell us about them? What do you say?
Sounds good.
Listener, we're fortunate to have engineer Rick on the Zoom to play some clips. And Rick, roll it.
I have long been passionate about pedestrian safety. I see it as a basic form of human travel and a right that we all have to walk safely in our communities and our cities. My name is Victoria Barrett, and I'm a transportation planner with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. CMAP works with our local and regional partners as well as federal partners on topics related to transportation and land use. Pedestrian safety is a critical issue today, and speeding is an epidemic in our country right now, and pedestrians are particularly at risk. One of the things that drives me is the right to walk for our children, and that became very personal for me when my daughter was in 4th grade, and I wanted to show her and give her the skills she needed to walk safely in our community.
Oh, great clip. For the listener, that was footage of cars going by and people walking, some kids hanging onto a rope crossing the street. But most importantly, our mutual friend Vicky talking to us about her work in this area. And you mentioned CMAP's local, regional, federal partners. You mentioned a couple already. Who is all involved in your work that you mentioned in this collab?
We on a regional level have made a very concerted decision to include traditional partners in traffic safety in our work, and some that are slightly outside of the traditional partners. So we have something called a safety resource group that helps provide guidance to our work as we develop these policy recommendations. And they include representatives from our state Department of Transportation, IDOT, the Illinois Department of Transportation, as well as advocates for safety. We have AAA on our group. We have some equity advocates from our region informing us about equitable traffic safety practices and policies. We have departments of transportation at the county level. We have representatives from enforcement. We have representatives from other advocacy groups that are working to improve policy on multiple fronts, kind of informing and guiding our work. So I think that's an important piece to mention, because safety has kind of been in the back room in a way. It's been something that engineers have handled, and it's been, technical books and, crash data analyses. But really what we're learning is that getting a larger group of stakeholders, both from the professional standpoint, but also engaging the public on traffic safety, has been highly informative. So I'm a big advocate of expanding the circle of traffic safety to include educators, other, local leaders that are wanting to do economic development in their communities. Safety is a factor in all of that. So we're casting a wider net than has been traditionally done.
Oh, interesting. How do you gauge the public in this kind of work?
So we've done a number of safety planning projects as a part of our work, and crash analyses is an important part of that. So, downloading crash data and looking at crash reports to understand which types of crashes are happening at which locations. That's important work. But we're also talking with representatives who are trying to expand bicycle and pedestrian mobility in their communities, or educators who have students trying to walk and bicycle to school, who have not only explained to us some details about crashes that may or may not have been, recorded exactly perfectly or totally in comprehensively, but we're also identifying perceived safety issues. So every day a bicyclist and a pedestrian chooses not just whether or not to bicycle or walk but which route they're going to take there, right? So we see some locations where we know they're probably pretty dangerous roadways for bicyclists and pedestrians, but no crashes with bicyclists and pedestrians there. And that's usually because they avoid certain types of roadways because they feel unsafe, or their parents don't allow them to travel near or along there. And that's very real. I mean, we have significant barriers in our communities to bicycle and pedestrian mobility and accessible mobility. So identifying those is really something you need to talk to people about.
Wow. And you also mentioned traffic safety and economic development, which maybe when you first said it, I thought maybe those ideas, how would they go together? But I guess having a safe way to do economic activity is probably pretty important. How does that happen in your work?
Well, we downtown areas in suburban areas and in larger cities have really suffered, not just because of online shopping, but the pandemic layer also added some complicating factors for people to access downtowns for, public health reasons or the availability of online shopping. So attracting people to downtowns as they start to revitalize now is really important, and making those pathways safe with calm traffic and slow speeds, or access by bicycling and walking, or to transit stops is all really important. Getting people to places safely is in essence, a way to get them spending money in downtowns and contributing to the, vitality of a place.
Very, very interesting. And another thing you mentioned on the clip was that speeding is an epidemic. How do we know that, and how do you quantify that?
That's an excellent question, because speeding, there are a couple of indicators that we have that speeding is a particular issue. First of all, the number of speeding related crashes that are reported on crash reports has ticked up. So there is a very real number increase in that. But there's also something, there's more going on with speeding. There's a long-term issue of speeding called speed creep. So over years, there are marginal increases in the speeds at which we feel it is safe to drive on different types of roads. The length of trips factors into how fast somebody travels, and we know that trips have gotten longer in a lot of metropolitan areas. But we knew speeding was an issue. It's an issue that the National Transportation Safety Board has already put on the radar. They're an organization that has long been associated with, aviation safety, but they are really turning their attention to roadway safety, because the number of fatalities is just so dramatically higher in roadway safety, and deserves some serious attention. So speed management is emerging after years of understanding that speeding related crashes are increasing, but the pandemic then kind of turned everything up even higher, because we saw reduced travel demand. So as more people stayed at home, worked remotely, we saw fewer cars on our roadways, and we saw a reduction in vehicle miles traveled, which is the number of miles traveled per person or per community. Mm-hmm. And that then was associated, a reduction in travel was associated with a spike in fatalities. This is the first time in the United States where we've seen a reduction in travel correlate to an increase in fatalities. Normally, reductions in travel correlate with a reduction in fatalities. So you start to look at why were more people dying in 2020 and 2021 on our roadways. And there were a couple facts that were very clear. The roadways were open, right? There was less congestion. Mm-hmm. So we had the ability for people to speed in what might have been a congested roadway, 2 years before. We also saw general risk-taking increase, and that was measured in a number of ways. There were, on a national level, they did some research that showed that many drivers were engaging in multiple risk factors while driving, so not using a seatbelt and speeding, or impaired driving and speeding. So we saw, as a society, increased stress, frustration. We had public health fears. We had people fear of financial fears associated with reduced work. And those forms of stress and frustration often played out on our roadways. That's one of the theories. So.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm sure people have kind of seen and experienced this or heard about this during the past couple of years, making this an even more timely topic. But you mentioned a personal story in the clip about why this work's become more important to you, and maybe you can tell us more about that and why children and pedestrians are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah, it is. It became particularly important to me as I started to realize that the children in my life, that my children would be out walking on the roadways in my community, and as someone that grew up doing that, that was a big part of my formative experience. It helped me increase my independence, my decision-making, and it gave me access to my community. I probably engaged with other adults more often and had these kind of positive community building experiences as a result of that independence and, some degree of executive functioning. So I was pretty passionate that I wanted to make that possible for my children. And I realized that if I was going to, there are educational programs that you can buy, but in large part, those programs are not a feature of our K-5 education curriculum anymore. Other topics have become more important, and it's really up to individual schools or districts to decide to focus on traffic safety skills at a young age. And part of that is also educating parents. One example that I give is when I lived in Germany, I had a child that was in 4th grade, and I watched her start her 4th grade year with an 8-week-long course in traffic safety. And they learned how to ride a bicycle. They learned how to cross a street. They learned the basic rules of traffic safety laws. And then they passed like a practical exam at the end of this course. And this was all part of just the public school system. And they got a little bicycle license and a pedestrian license from the police department that not only made them safer on the roadways and made them more aware of traffic safety issues, but it also helped the parents feel more confident that their children had been given the skills and the information and the decision-making tools for how to navigate safely, make eye contact with people at stop signs and different things like that.
Oh, wow. That's really neat. And my son just started walking and around the house. And so I'm thinking about all the safety hazards I need to address in my home. And someday I'll be concerned about the hazards outside the home. So I'm glad we're talking to you today. But that's all very interesting. But we've got another clip. Let's take a look and we'll ask you some more.
My name is Daisy Singh, and I'm with the Roadway Safety Foundation. The Roadway Safety Foundation is a charitable educational foundation dedicated to reducing traffic fatalities and roadway crashes through better roadway design and engineering.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a steep increase in pedestrian-related crashes. In 2020, during the pandemic, we had about a 4.8% increase in these deaths over 2019 levels. And when you factor in the fact that there was so much less travel going on, the pedestrian fatality rate, according to the Governor's Highway Safety Association, actually skyrocketed over 20%, which is really unprecedented. My name is Bruce Hamilton. I'm the Managing Director of the Roadway Safety Foundation. We think that engineering is one of the key elements of designing a safe system. We can do a lot more to be building safe environments through infrastructure improvements and design and technological enhancements.
There are a lot.
Oh, wonderful. That is, again, for the listener, awesome, footage of traffic and people walking around. Click the link in the show notes if you want to see them. But more importantly, we heard from Bruce and Daisy from the Roadway Safety Foundation. You've already touched on some of the work you do with them. How is their work with you informing CMAP and its kind of expanding work on traffic and pedestrian safety?
Yeah, that's so safety is a very complex field, traffic safety. It has a lot of inputs that go into it. Not only do we have, the roadway that is designed for travel, or the sidewalks, we have the vehicles that drive on them. We have people behind the wheels that are making decisions about how to use them. We have, access to emergency services once a crash occurs. So there are a lot of inputs into traffic safety, and one that has maybe not received the attention that it deserves is a roadway design philosophy that really embraces people on foot, on bicycle, in wheelchairs, on all the different modes that are not a vehicle. We have really designed our roadways to expedite vehicular traffic in many ways and get as many cars as quickly and efficiently through the system as possible. And that's come at a price for the safety of those of us who move slower, on a different mode, operating at a different speed. So they are important partners in helping really promote this idea that we can design our roadways better to manage speeds, increase the visibility of different modes of travel, so that drivers have a better chance to react to them in time, to avoid a crash or to reduce the severity of a crash. So that's some of the really important work that they do.
You mentioned a couple of things that makes it sound like, informs why this is such a complex problem to address. What other reasons are there that makes traffic safety kind of a multifaceted problem? So you talked about all the different kinds of inputs into this work.
It's a very complex system, and it's been traditionally described as the E's of traffic safety, which have included engineering, which means design, enforcement, which means, police enforcement of speeds, education, emergency services. Recently, equity has been added as one of the E's, and then evaluation, which is kind of making sure that we're measuring improvements in traffic safety to understand what works and what doesn't. There's a movement away from that because what it has done is it has siloed some of those topics. So, for example, there's also an important piece, which I didn't mention, which is policy associated with traffic safety, which is kind of different than any of those other categories. That's, how we set the speed limits in our communities and our states. And so there's a new approach to traffic safety that's called the safe systems approach, which it's more than a diagram, but it is important to note that the diagram is a circle instead of a bunch of different buckets. And there is something on the outside of the circle called traffic safety culture. So the safe systems approach really focuses on the interactions between those different silos. So how does the design of our roadway, or how should the design of our roadway inform the desired operating speed that we want people to travel at? And how does that relate to the sign that is posted on the side of the roadway that indicates to a driver what the maximum allowed speed is? And what tools can we be putting inside our vehicles to help us be safer on the roadway? And a lot of that's a very exciting field as well. So that traffic safety culture piece is actually really critical. It's a band around the outside of the safe systems approach that has all the pieces of safety and then a circle of culture, because it really is information, right? It's creating consistent systems of data and data reporting and data collection. It is deciding as a society what our values are in terms of designing our roads and setting policies, and then developing consistent tools and resources for people working on roadway safety, so that our interventions are aligned and our priorities are all aligned, and really like creating a stronger sense of what we're doing and why. And that is, as you can imagine, a really complicated topic, right? It includes people's values, it includes behavior, it includes the decisions that we make when we drive a car, and just how much time we've allowed to get to our destination. Like, there's just so many things to capture inside of the safety piece to improve. But design is critical. And I think I would just like to mention that, our system, I mentioned, has really been designed to move cars as quickly and efficiently as possible, which is a highway safety principle, right? I mean, when our federal highway system was developed, that was the mission, was to quick, efficient, safe transportation. But those same policies and design tools that facilitate fast-moving traffic were applied on every roadway and street in our communities. And really, in reality, on the streets that we live, the streets where we shop, streets where we send our students to schools or to parks. We don't want cars to be moving as fast as possible. We want it to be as safe as possible. So it requires a shift in thinking.
Yeah, that very complex topic, as you mentioned. But I want to pick up on that thread that's kind of been running throughout, that kind of underlines and emphasizes how important this work is right now, is some of those troubling statistics that Bruce mentioned in the clip. Is that just like a Chicago area thing, or is that a national trend, or what kinds of communities, like urban, suburban, rural, are experiencing these changes? And if we were talking to, if the litigators in my office heard this, they would object to this compound question that I'm asking. But are these conditions improving as pandemic conditions improve? Do we expect that these statistics to improve, or is there more work to do?
Okay, so that's a multiple compound question in my head, because there's a lot going on. But I will say that these trends are national. It's not just the Chicago region that's dealing with it. There are some, and I also want to just stop and pause, because we in safety, talk about fatalities on a daily basis, and sometimes I just want to stop and say the word deaths. These are people who are no longer with us as a result of a crash on our roadways, and the numbers are staggering and deserve a moment. In our country last year, we lost over 42,000 people on our roadways.
That's a big number, that's sobering when you think those are real people. That was one question I considered, like reading these stats and that you mentioned, it's sometimes has to be difficult doing this kind of work, hearing these stories, engaging with the public, and hearing these or like real people that are impacted by these conditions.
It is. It's a motivator for me every day. And since starting this position alone, there are many people that I know personally who have been touched by traffic safety, either in a serious crash and in one case a fatality. These are real. These are our mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and children and teachers, and everyone in our lives is affected by this topic. And it is a national trend. It's going on in most places. There are certain types of places where there are some interesting patterns. So like pedestrian fatalities are often in place. They seem to be growing at a higher rate in some of our cities in the southern part of the United States. These are cities that were generally developed after the car became pretty standard. So their roadways tend to be a little bit wider, a little bit harder to cross, a little bit faster moving. They're referred to as Sunbelt cities. So there's a bit of a trend there. So some of the older development patterns where the streets are more constrained are performing a little bit better in pedestrian safety. But in our region alone, our pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities increased about 50% in the last 5 years. So we see those numbers growing at a very alarming rate. We refer to bicyclists and pedestrians and non-vehicular travelers as vulnerable roadway users because they are so susceptible to traffic safety issues, and speeds. Speeds are particularly important to those of us who are walking and bicycling. So the local numbers reflect the national numbers.
And is this just like a pandemic spike, or that we expect to go away, or is that or is this a more longer term trend that's just one of those things that like the pandemic like already just magnified what was already going on?
So it's interesting. There are a couple of trends on top of one another. Like since the 80s, traffic safety in the United States has generally improved. So vehicle technologies and improved roadways have generally had a positive effect on safety. But in 2014, that started to reverse. So there is a trend that started, about 10 years ago, where we saw increases in our roadway fatalities after decades of decline. Some of that is associated with distracted driving, the advent of the cell phone in every car and that kind of thing. So there's that kind of long-term trend that I think we should probably plan on still needing to be addressed. The COVID layer is complicated. In some ways, we saw, there's evidence to suggest that we saw increases in bicycling and walking activity. So many people who worked remotely were then or chose to get exercise by walking or bicycling near their house. They weren't necessarily tied to a long commute in a car or on a train kind of thing. And there is some evidence to suggest that activity levels for walking and bicycling are increasing. So that the fact that we might have more users exposed to traffic safety, vulnerable roadway users who are exposed to traffic safety, is something that we are planning on continuing to see. So the speeding epidemic, traffic safety includes a lot of, I don't want to say randomness because there are systems in place, but
yeah,
that a crash happens or that a crash is that severe has a lot of nuances to it. So it will be, we see variation in safety every year, and that isn't necessarily because of like one huge long-term trend, because it is so complicated. But we do expect that patterns of behavior that started in the pandemic may very well continue. And it's important to kind of re-emphasize the importance of information and education to the public and the dangers of speeding, for example. And so we're not taking anything, any return to a safer condition for granted. We are definitely planning to just improve as much as possible policy and design and all the traffic safety things we're focused on.
Yeah, you mentioned education. I think in this next clip, there's some other solutions, some goals that are tools that local governments might be able to implement. Rick, why don't you roll it?
A lot of emerging technologies that keep our pedestrians safe. Some of those are real technological advances, like the FHWA's STEP technologies. Pedestrian hybrid beacons and leading pedestrian intervals are two examples of technologies that are improving pedestrian safety. A leading pedestrian interval is an advanced walk signal for pedestrians, meaning they get the walk signal a little bit before the vehicles traveling in the same direction get a green light. There are other very simple things that communities can do to improve pedestrian safety, such as restriping crosswalks, making lanes a little narrower and restriping them so that cars receive some visual signals that there is a complicated environment and that they should slow their travel speeds and pay attention to the potential for crossing pedestrians.
For the listener, more outstanding footage of pedestrians and vehicles, but most importantly, Vicky talking about some of these technologies that maybe I knew they existed as a pedestrian and just didn't realize it, but maybe you could tell us more about these. Maybe start with the STEP technology you mentioned.
Yeah, so these are technologies that have been around for a while, but Their safety benefits have been demonstrated very clearly. And when they get promoted by large agencies like the FHWA, that's a really important kind of seal of approval on their effectiveness and their safety. So these technologies are a response to pedestrian fatalities. Basically, we've seen pedestrians who what we've done is we've designed a roadway system where our intersections are often far apart from one another. And as anyone who walks around knows, you don't always want to travel out of your way for a very far distance to get to the closest intersection. So on these roadways where we have large gaps in safe pedestrian crossings, these technologies can really provide an additional layer of safety by providing a crossing in between long distances of intersections, increasing the visibility of the pedestrian who's using them with flashing lights, or in the pedestrian hybrid beacon example, an actual signal. So one of them is a warning system and one of them is actually a traffic signal that needs to be obeyed by cars. And they do a great job of adding crossing opportunities and encouraging use of safe crossing opportunities so that we can increase mobility for pedestrians and also add to their safety.
Yeah, and mentioned this earlier, but the importance of road design. And I think there's some examples in there of like restriping crosswalks or narrowing lanes. What are some other like design tools in the toolbox that the local governments might have?
Well, what we know is that wide, straight, and flat streets promote higher speeds. So when there are no obstacles for you to navigate around or over, you have a tendency to build up speed issues on roadways like that. So there are, and it's very context sensitive. So certain types of treatments are appropriate for certain types of roadways with certain speeds and volumes of traffic. But there are a variety of humps, speed humps, that can be used in different situations. So everyone is probably familiar with the traditional traffic calming speed hump in a residential neighborhood that just physically prevents you from going too fast over it without damaging your car or just making a really loud noise. But there are also variations on that treatment. So in downtown areas, for example, on a street where you want to promote pedestrian crossings, some communities are putting in speed tables to elevate the pedestrian crossing, either at an intersection or at a mid-block location, so that it lifts the pedestrian up higher off of the roadway, so it increases their visibility and also acts as a slowing mechanism for cars who are traveling over it. It usually has a flat top with a crosswalk on it. So those types of things, traffic circles and roundabouts and these different types of features where we need to maneuver our car around have a natural ability to slow our operating speeds.
Now, I wonder if you've ever encountered this in your work, but maybe some pushback from drivers or local officials about some of these designs that maybe see something pop up in front of their business or their home, and they might have some opinions about it. How do you respond to those?
Well, for businesses, companies, shops, restaurants, I think it's important to mention that everybody that walks through the front door is walking in on foot. So getting people to storefronts and businesses safely on foot is key, and ultimately expanding, the access that people have to a business. I think most people who live on residential streets themselves are generally happy because speed humps actually are very effective. They're very effective in slowing vehicle speeds, and they're correlated with lower rates of juvenile deaths. I mean, they have very compelling benefits. There is a human nature part of us that wants to get things done quickly and efficiently. And I think everyone, sometimes is in a situation where you just want to get someplace really fast And that's the point where I just think we have to keep messaging and educating people on the risks of speeding, and that the point of all of this is to improve public health in the form of reducing, fatalities and serious injuries. So when people complain about something, I think, yeah, that's the point. The point is that we're trying to get you to move slower in certain contexts, right? We're not talking about putting speed bumps up on highways, for example, but in places where people are at risk, it's important.
Right. And that kind of leads into my next question. How do communities identify where they have their traffic safety issues and identify where to apply these treatments?
Yeah, that's a really important first step. And that is one of the things that CMAP is really focusing on, is helping improve access to safety data, which is often crash reports, and then resources that you can use to address the types of crashes that you have. There are a lot of excellent resources at the Federal Highway Administration's safety website that can help communities do roadway safety audits and understand which kinds of countermeasures, safety countermeasures, can be used to improve certain types of safety issues. But data is a really big point, and a lot of local governments don't have the time or the capacity to go find the data and analyze the data and then respond to the data. So it's one of the ways in which MPOs can really assist local partners by kind of providing a clearinghouse for information and resources to local partners, help them understand the issues, and then also, provide a kind of consistent guidance across a connected regional area on how we're going to address safety issues and what are the design consistencies that we can really promote so that a bicycle lane in this community matches the same look of the bicycle lane in the other community, and it has a high level of safety associated with it, for example.
An MPO is a marvelous planning organization.
Exactly. I meant to have you check me for acronyms. Planning is so rife with acronyms. MPO. If that's the only one I did during this interview, I'm going to consider that a win. MPO is a Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Oh, right,
which
right.
Oversees a urbanized area around a city, so larger than a city itself.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's not the only regional partner. I'm thinking about all these different roads, and that not every road has the same authority having jurisdiction over them. And so what other kind of what advice do you have for local governments with the intergovernmental piece of this, and with their state transportation department, county, township?
Yeah, exactly. All of that. Again, a really important role for MPOs to play in helping coordinate across multi-jurisdictional issues, particularly as they relate to safety. That is one of the key functions of an MPO is coordination, collaboration, convening partners to talk about the issues and building consensus on that. So again, I'd say with our layers of government, certainly here in Illinois, but in other regions across the United States, it's one of the opportunities that MPOs have to really have an impact.
Yeah. So what is CMAP doing to support local governments doing this specifically?
So in addition to improving access to data, so we're making available crash data and crash reports, we're also developing policy recommendations, some of which would be at the state level, but some of them would be at the local level to address traffic safety, like how to reduce speed limits in places where they're too high, or improve the ability of a roadway to curb speeding through a design toolkit. These are all things that we have planned as part of our safety program at CMAP.
What's a recent example of of a project or an improvement that CMAP helps make to make pedestrian infrastructure more safe?
Yeah, well, we've been working with a couple communities in the region recently on safety projects, which started with accessing the crash data that community needed to understand. One example I can think of is in Calumet City, and they have a local roadway that is under their jurisdiction. It does intersect with some state jurisdiction roads, but they wanted to develop a complete streets plan for that roadway, which would not only serve the needs of bicyclists and pedestrians, many of whom were accessing a large high school that was on that corridor, but they also wanted to promote economic development in a commercial district that is closely tied to the high school area. And we helped them introduce features that would improve their intersection safety, that would curb speeding in that roadway, would add infrastructure for safe bicycle passage and access, and also really serve the economic development opportunities of that community. You know, those are the types of streets where outdoor dining is attractive and something that became very popular during COVID, for example. So
Yeah.
improving safety on streets like that makes them more pleasant streets to be on, accessible by more modes of travel, and kind of more vibrant in general.
And I guess so a city like Calumet City, you know, it might have different treatments than like a more urban or more suburban or more rural community. How does the approaches to this work vary depending from community to community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of there are extremely urban contexts that, you know, where you want the slowest speeds and the highest levels of you know, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, but every community has a variety of street types. You know, in traffic, you know, transportation planning, you have arterials, you have collectors, and you have local streets, and they all have different volumes of traffic, different speeds. And most communities have a variety of those types of streets. And what you find is that it's not necessarily completely different for each type of community, but it is different. The safety principles and countermeasures do vary according to the type of street that you're working on. So it's another, you know, it's a way to package toolkits for you to understand what traffic calming looks like on a collector street versus an arterial street versus a residential street, many of which all communities have.
Very, very interesting. And you know, thinking about, you know, the local, regional, and federal partners in this work you've mentioned, is there anything in the new infrastructure law we should know about that addresses traffic safety?
Yes, there is. There are, you know, it is a national priority right now, traffic safety, as I alluded to before. And the federal government is putting serious money and effort behind traffic safety in a new program called the Safe Streets for All, a discretionary grant program. It's an opportunity that is open this year for the next 2 weeks, actually.
Oh my gosh.
For communities, yeah, for communities to apply for money to create safety plans for their communities, and eventually, or in addition to money to implement a safety action plan. And it's a $5 billion program. It's $1 billion a year for the next 5 years dedicated to safety. So it is a very exciting opportunity to make a real impact in safety in the coming decade. This money will be in play at least for the next decade.
That's a lot of pedestrian hybrid beacons, $5 billion. But where people can find out more information about that over the next week or so.
Yeah, right. Get going. It's called the Safe Streets for All program. I believe the website is called safestreetsforall.gov, but you can check that and confirm. But it is pretty available if you do a Google search, and they provide a lot of guidance, including some informational webinars about how to apply.
Google it, Bing it. We'll we'll try to find a link and toss it in the show notes along with the link to this video. I think we've got one more clip to play. Rick, roll it.
I wish that more people considered the fact that we are all pedestrians. The reality is every single person is a pedestrian, probably every single day. And I wish that more people knew, one, just how big the risk is. We have lost about 6,700 people in 2020 alone. That's a big number. And I'm not sure that people really appreciate just how much vulnerability people have on the road and how much responsibility we have every time we use a public roadway.
Your decisions can have a lasting impact
on your life
and the lives of others.
Wow, that last bit, listener, to really emphasize that last point, everybody on the video is looking right down the barrel of the lens of the camera. That's a very, neat video and important topic. And Bruce mentioned those sobering statistics again. Talking to all the deaths, but imagine just all the injuries that occur. Kind of emphasizing. Maybe you could tell me why you find this work so important.
Well, it's literally life and death. And it's also relevant to everyone, right? I mean, whether you're driving, walking, bicycling, taking transit, any of those modes, everyone moves around and across our cities and communities. And we all contribute to a safety culture in our regular decision making. So that's pretty profound to me. It's all of our jobs to make our roadways safer, and we all make decisions every day that do that. So it keeps me very focused.
Any other resources or anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well,
the CMAP dot
CMAP.illinois.gov is the CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning website. We do have examples of our projects, of our safety planning projects that we are doing in our communities, and some toolkits available of how to do complete streets planning and different things that make our communities kind of more livable for all users. So I invite everyone to check that out.
And Vicki will be at the APA Illinois State Conference later this month, and end of September. It's happening at the CMAP offices at the old post office. So if you're check it out. Encourage you, and you'll be talking about complete streets, right?
Yes, I will. Lots of other interesting topics at that conference. So I hope everyone can join us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I want to thank you for joining me today for this episode. But I do have one last question for you. If you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for this episode?
I would have to pick Walk of Life by Dire Straits.
That's a little on the nose, but I like it. I'll take it. We'll add it in post. Thank you again, Vicki. That ends our episode for today. Thanks for coming on and talking with me. GovLove is produced by a rotating cast of ELGL volunteers. ELGL 22 is coming up. And this year we're gathering in Phoenix, Arizona on October 13th and 14th. Tickets are on sale now, so you can plan on being the most engaging local government conference of the year. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. You can reach us at elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at GovLovePodcast. Thanks for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government. Bye.